Welcome back to CivilNet. You are following our live coverage of the Electric Yerevan protest taking place on Baghramian Avenue. We have been dedicating this past hour to English language programming. We are interviewing different people to try and get a perspective of what's taking place in the capital of Armenia. Now joining me is Samson Avetyan. He's an economist with Aero Global Limited. Samson, thank you for joining us. I'm going to do a slightly long introduction to my question, just to frame it properly. So the Electric Yerevan protest was triggered after the country's Public Services Regulatory Commission unanimously approved an increase in electricity tariffs at the appeal of Electric Network Armenia, which is a Russian-managed sort of monopoly on the electricity power supply in the country. And this triggered what we have today. Following that decision, several things happened that are very interesting. And from an economist's point of view, I want to get your opinion and see what you think. On June 26, President Serge Sarkisyan met with the Russian Transport Minister, Maxim Sokolov, and he was able to get from him certain concessions, which was astounding, taking into consideration that these issues are not new. The one was that the Russian-Armenian Intergovernmental Commission to undertake an independent audit of the company, the Russian-managed company. The other was the handing over of the Russian soldier who was accused in the massacre of the Avetyan family in Gyumri, Valery Permyakov, to the Armenian side, when Armenia's prosecutor general back then said, citing Russian constitution, said that, he cannot be handed over to Armenian authorities. And now all of a sudden he's being handed over to Armenian authorities. Armenia signed an agreement to get a low-interest $200 million loan from Russia, all on the same day. And a day later we heard that an Armenian citizen who was accused in the killing of about 18 people in a traffic accident, Hracha Harutyunyan, would also be extradited to Armenia. So this was quite astounding that 7 years of Serge Sarkisyan's authority was not able to get this much, this quick. But Electric Yerevan in 7 days was able to get this from the Russian side. What is your opinion? How do you think that this particular movement was able to scare the Kremlin so much?
Well, obviously there is a correlation to the pressure and the results, as you pointed out. I don't know the details about those discussions, I cannot judge. Mm-hmm. However, when there is pressure, and I think it's very healthy to have pressure from the society for change, I think that pressure is ultimately what's going to drive progress in this country. Either the progress usually is driven either from the leaders. If it's not driven from the leaders, it's driven from the below. In our case, it's most likely in these couple of years that the pressure is going to be driving change above as opposed to the opposite. Mm-hmm. So I think it's very healthy. I think it's very good. And I think that's a lot of progress for everyone to see, and it's a big inspiration for us all.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I think it's the blossoming of an independent civil society in Armenia that's leading this. The following day, on June 27, Armenia's president met with his economic policy advisors. I mean, he had to come out of this impasse. This movement, this protest had shut down Baghramian Avenue. It wasn't Liberty Square, whereas, it's a traditional place for movements and protests to take place in Armenia. This was Baghramian's Avenue, where the presidential palace is located, where the National Assembly is located. So President Serge Sarkisyan meets with his economic advisors, and he says that he suggests that they find an international consulting company to conduct an audit, and until that audit is finalized, that the government will shoulder the burden of the tariff increase. The audit would also, in the meantime, ask the question, what was the rationale to increase the tariff? And what are the risks of not increasing the tariff for the energy sector? And he said that, to appease people, he said, we're not going to be cutting social programs, we're not going to be cutting any other kind of programs that would impact people's lives. We're going to be using, and I quote directly from the president's webpage, that we will finance it through the resources allocated for the further reinforcement of our security. A lot of people on the street, ordinary Armenian citizens, people who aren't economists, right, thought, well, if I'm not going to pay for it, but it's coming out of the budget, but that budget is formed from my taxes, so basically I'm still paying for it. And they felt this was an insult to their intelligence. What do you think that the president's sort of solution, was it a concession, or was he buying time?
I think in the short term, everyone wants to calm the situation down, and I think that's their objective. Obviously, people are well informed enough how the budget is created and what the sources of funding are. I mean, they can either use the taxes they already have, or they can take a new loan. I think this is a short-term issue. For me, this is not the most important thing here. I think for me, what's of most importance is whether this audit or this results, what we have right now, is going to be used for the authorities to use this audit as a facilitator, as a catalyst, to look at this energy sector, energy industry, more comprehensively, more from a strategic reason. I think they have a very good catalyst, a very good motivation right now to drive change, because as we know, there are a lot of reforms that need to be done in the sector. There's a lot of corruption risk, if not corruption properly in the sector. There's very little, or let's say not enough diversification. Many large blocks of the industry are owned by state-owned companies from another state, which is very rare on international comparisons. I would find very difficult to find countries where there is a situation like this. So my hope is that this is going to be used, and I think there were some insinuations from the president that this is going to be used as a catalyst for improvement, for reforms. I think they have enough pressure from beneath to drive that. They have enough pressure from beneath to motivate any changes versus other stakeholders. So let's see what happens. I think I don't know what the probabilities are, but let's wait and see. Maybe we'll get a good outcome. And I think all of these discussions are not 7 drams per se. I think there's a much bigger discussion on
Yeah,
these.
absolutely. I think that's been the sentiment across the board. Let's assume that this international consulting company, after concluding the audit, they do in fact find that there was corruption, graft, that there was horrible mismanagement, and that the electric network Armenia company wasn't in fact to blame for this for the condition that it finds itself in through poor management or whatever. What is your opinion? If you were the president of Armenia or the prime minister of Armenia, would you then want to nationalize it and then think about how to diversify the energy sector, which is such a critical sector for any country?
I think the optimal solution, usually state-owned companies, and we're seeing it right now, there's a very high corruption risk in state-owned companies. There are very few state-owned companies that are clean of that, one. Secondly, state-owned companies are not governed, they're not competitive usually, they're not managed the best way possible. So the optimal solution is that you have a private company managing a company within the sphere. Now, how likely is that? I don't know. Usually these companies are state-owned in most countries, even in the West, or in developed countries in general, or even developing. So, I don't know, there are talks about private investors coming in, buying this out. I think if that's a good private investor that has little connections to the so-called elites, I think that would be the optimal solution, because your company will be far more efficient, far more productive that way. Now, we'll also have to understand that any private investor coming in, there's a lot of debt on that company, and there's a lot of investments needed.
$250 million.
So, as a private investor, you have to come in and you have to make money. You're not going to do it altruistically. So if you want to make money on it, you have to raise the fees. Now, if the society or if the people see that there is actually a program or a strategic approach to all of this, I think we all can accept the rise in fees if there's sufficient trust and credibility towards authorities.
How do you build sufficient trust and credibility?
Through elections, usually. I mean, this is not. I think the authorities are. You can blame current authorities as well, but they also have a certain baggage from previous authorities. Sure. This is. So we're struggling with that right now.
Talking about bottom-up or top-down pressure to to make change in Armenia. Oftentimes we have said that as long as business and politics are so intimately intertwined in Armenia, as long as members of parliament, the vast majority of them, continue to also be business owners, who are not legislators, who oftentimes, I'm not sure if they read the legislation or the bill that they're voting upon. How does that begin to change? For example, there are a lot of monopolies in Armenia. And Armenia being a small market, maybe we would have natural monopolies in order to compete with global markets. But how do we break that? How do we break it? Is it in legislation? Is it political will? Is it saying to the monopolist, saying, you know what, pay your taxes, don't get involved in politics. I will do everything to protect your interests through proper legislation and regulation. Is it possible, do you foresee in the near future, can Armenia start moving toward that separation?
I think it's possible. I just think that the political sphere in this country has to mature a bit. Usually even on the opposition side, there's a lack of maturity, let's say. I mean, obviously there is conflict of interest between several parliamentarians and their businesses and so on. But I also think, and I don't know if this is a common knowledge or not, but I don't think these people that have business interests sitting in the parliament want to be associated that much with the politics, because at some point it becomes a personal risk for themselves. So I think for them, and even if the country is mismanaged or misgoverned or not governed optimally, you have an economic downturn like we have right now, and then the risks rise of repercussions. And then you see that they are suffering on their business side because they're making less money, and they also have an increased political or personal risk of safety. Now, if you ask people pragmatically, would you like to be involved? I think not. And I think in time, if there is an opposition that is pragmatic enough to understand all of these nuances and say, okay, why don't you get out of politics, take this political burden and these risks off of your shoulders, and there will be an amnesty or some type of agreement that rules change, and from here on we work cleanly. I don't think it's going to be that difficult for them to get out of it and just hire professional managers and so on to manage their businesses. And that way, if we have that kind of a government, their businesses will prosper much better than they do right now. So I think there's obviously a solution, but there's maturity and development on the political side to get there. Whether we'll get there till 17, maybe, I don't know.
Well, perhaps with social movements like this one, it would help push the process forward. Just the final question, do you think that Electric Yerevan will be a game changer?
I think it showed us, and I think we haven't seen it for a long time, that there's a lot of, this built a lot of hope and a lot of inspiration. And I think the fact that there is most of the involved youth, the youngsters and the new generation, I think that's inspiration not only for them, it's inspiration even for the older generations as well. So I think it's a very big energy booster to all of us.
Samson, thank you for your insights. Thank you for joining us here at our studio late in the evening as the Electric Yerevan protest continues on Parliament. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to remind our viewers that my guest was Samson Avetyan. He's an economist with Aero Global Limited. We are going to be wrapping up our English language portion of our live broadcast of the Electric Yerevan protest. I'd like to thank you for watching us. Keep following us. You can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We are trying to give up to the minute by minute information to our viewers of what's taking place on Pagramian and in Armenia. I will now cut to my colleague Ani Grigorian, who is on Pagramian Avenue for the continuation of our live stream.